We're back. Decision 2019 coverage for you tonight. We welcome the challenger in the Utica mayoral race, Joe Marino, here taking on the incumbent mayor, Robert Palmieri, in the Democratic primary on June 25th. Thanks for coming up the hill to answer some of these questions for us. A lot of our viewers had asked, and a lot of us have been wanting to ask as well. And I'm going to start with what you feel is the single biggest issue facing the city of Utica right now.
Well, the single biggest issue facing the city is absolutely roads. It's roads and paving and paying attention to the things that matter. I mean, a 1A to that is, for me, it's term limits. The way that the city was treated and the fact that their vote essentially right now doesn't count, I'd like to give that back to them. I'd like to give them back a little confidence in their government, and I'd like to give them back a little bit of pride in the city in that regard.
I want to go back to term limits in just a minute, but first let's talk about downtown development. It's seen a big push in the last couple of years. So as mayor, what would you do to keep that momentum? And are there any specific projects that you want to see through over the next few years?
Yeah, see, downtown development for me is wonderful. The fact, though, is that it's been very private development. There's really been nothing from the city pushing it along. Now, there's a lot of credit being taken, a lot of things that that people are saying, but downtown development is wonderful and it's organic, and that's what's so prominent about it. That's what's so good-natured about it, is that it really is organic. What I really want to focus on, we've got to keep that going, and the Nexus Center is a big part of that downtown development. The hospital's another big part of that, and we need to be leaders in those issues and not just let them happen organically, because those are actually government projects, and government projects need leadership. The buildings that are sold and the things that are happening, those were going to happen. Whether my son were the mayor or I were the mayor or any other government official, those things, those organic things, we got to make sure that we cultivate them. But things like the Nexus, things like the hospital, things like roadwork projects that the New York State DOT is doing right now, we have to make sure that we cultivate those and do them the right way. Because if we get them wrong, they're 100-year projects. If we get them wrong now and we don't lead them, then we're destined to kind of fail to the bad old days of the city of Utica.
You mentioned the downtown development regarding the hospital.
Yeah.
Whether you're for or against the hospital is besides the point right now. With it moving forward, you had talked about how the mayor wasn't doing enough to keep businesses within the footprint from leaving the city limits.
Right.
You're on the council. You're on the Common Council. What is the council doing to keep those businesses here? What would you do? What would you do differently?
Yeah, well, I've talked to a few of those businesses, and the fact is the Common Council doesn't really run the economic development engine of the city. We really have no say over it. So we can have all the conversations we want as a council. That leadership has got to come from the top. And what we did was, as a city and our leadership, it really was lacking. We didn't get involved in the hospital discussion until 2.5. Don't forget, we're 4 years deep into this discussion for the hospital. Not only until about a year and a half ago did the mayor actually get on board and start, talking about it and getting involved with the community foundation. Those things are great. But I firmly believe that the hospital would be 2.5, 3 stories done by now if we got in on time. Because if you recall, there was a memorandum of understanding between the county and the city that's been sitting on the desk of the mayor for multiple years. Not only did he sign it until about a year and a half ago. So that lack of leadership, that lack of commitment, let's say, to the hospital, it really drove some undecisiveness with the businesses down there. And because we weren't on board, we weren't having those discussions. And because we're not having those discussions, things like Mohawk Valley Hospital Supply is moving. Brandley's is moving. The Clementi's. When you want to have a multi-diverse economic driver around the hospital, it's already there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So what I would do differently is I would have been constantly communicating with those businesses, and I have. As a councilman, I have. It's just, executive powers need to come into play at a certain point, and that's a large part of the reason I want to run for mayor.
Let's go back to term limits. Do you feel city candidates should be allowed to run for more than 2 terms?
I do not. As of right now, no. The voters decided that 2 terms, 4 for council, 2 for 4-year elected officials.
So you'd put it back?
Absolutely, within 30 days. That's not even a really hard thing to do. I'd like to work with a council that would help me put it back to restore government to all facets of our government. Or if I have to, if a council won't work with me, I'll do it with charter reform. As mayor, just as an executive power. But again, that's really incredibly easy. And the fact that we turned that voter referendum away, it didn't allow the debate as to whether or not term limits are good or bad. It was just an underhanded way to kind of withhold your own power. And that's what I feel like the people out there, they hate the most, is that it just was done in a way that was very deceiving and very underhanded.
Candidate Joe Marino challenging incumbent Mayor Robert Palmieri in the Democratic primary on June 25th. Thank you so much for coming up.
Kristen, thank you for having me. I look forward to meeting more people out in the streets, and we're doing really well. So, please get out and vote on June 25th.
And we'll have more to come.